Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today what I want to talk about is common problems you might encounter with your bonsai, and more specifically your indoor bonsai, and what are the solutions for those problems. So what you can expect in these videos are topics like pests, leaf discoloration, root rot, stunted growth, and how you can spot those problems and how to also deal with them. And in the end I will give you my specific and very personalized tip on how I make sure I stay on top of problems that might appear in indoor bonsai, so stick around for that as well. But I would say let's get in right away with the first topic, which I would like to start with is leaf discoloration, because that is something that quite commonly appears. And I would like to start basically by just seeing how you can identify that problem. And of course with leaf discoloration, this is quite easy by simply checking on your bonsai trees, seeing how they're doing, if you can spot any leaves that have discoloration. This can be spots on the leaves, for example. This could also be leaves that are starting to yellow. And if this appears on a single leaf, or if you can really see on a tree that many leaves are affected by that. So for example, here I have one of my ficus, and you can see on some of this new growth here in the back that there is some discoloration going on, and it is quite splotchy, I would say. It has this yellow splotches starting to appear. And this, for example, could be a case of lacking nutrients. So it is in very dense soil still, this bonsai. So to give you an idea, this is just basically the soil it came in. I think it's the last bonsai I have left that I bought commercially that I still have in the soil I bought it in. And there's a reason why it is the last one. And you can see actually how it affects the tree. So it doesn't get enough nutrients. I think I use normally liquid fertilizer on this one, but it simply doesn't penetrate the soil enough to actually reach the roots in a way that it can actually absorb most of those nutrients. And that's why on a lot of this new growth, I can see now this splotchy pattern. So it definitely is lacking some nutrients. So that is something, when you go look at your tree, you identify a problem like this, and then basically you go deeper into research, what could it be? In this case, pretty sure it's nutrients, but of course there's many other reasons that can be behind leaf discoloration. If we talk now about the leaf discoloration that goes more into yellowing leaves and dropping leaves, a problem that I, for example, had on this tree, not a ficus, where you can see it is quite bare at some lower branches, then you probably need to dig a little bit deeper, because there could be many problems. It could be your watering schedule that is not the best for the tree and doesn't fit for the tree. It might be a lighting problem, either gets too much light and it burns the leaves, or it gets too little light and it simply affects the health of the tree. And of course, a big problem there could also be root rot. So definitely something to look into also might be root rot at this point. So to summarize, for leaf discoloration, identification normally is quite easy. See what sort of discoloration it is, and then look into common reasons behind that discoloration. So this can be watering schedule, lack of nutrition through fertilizer, as well as really underlying problems of either pests, though more commonly than also root rot that leads to leaf discoloration. So much for the first topic, and I would move right away onwards to root rot, because that is definitely something, once you're affected by it, it is definitely something that gives you a headache when you have to deal with it with your indoor bonsai. And once again, this little ficus here that you can see right in front of you, that has been affected by root rot, that I basically caught only through the identification of the discoloring leaves and dropping leaves, which it can be quite normal for some leaves to be dropped on a tree, especially for ficus. They do tend to drop a couple of leaves every now and again, so that shouldn't normally be a problem. But as it was the case with this one, if it really happens on many different branches and it becomes more and more, it is definitely about time to look into spotting which reasons could be behind this loss of leaves then. And I decided, as it was still in the soil I bought it in, and again the problem we spot there right away, I decided to repot it. And while repotting it, I already saw that many of those roots, they started to be mushy, they started to turn into a very grayish, unhealthy looking color. And it was definitely the beginning of root rot there that already started to settle in. So how do you check for root rot? Of course, the only really viable way is to take it out of the pot, to take the soil off of the roots, and then see how is the structure of the roots. Are the roots overall healthy? Can you spot some rot right away? It is often the case, healthy roots, you have very creamy white roots that are very firm. And if you then spot roots that are rather brownish, grayish, and they are quite, first of all, quite wet actually, and also just mushy, and really they start to disintegrate basically, then you know you have root rot on your hand. And what is the remedy for that is basically to be as drastic as possible, cut off all the rot you can see on your roots, make sure you really treat it a bit more aggressively than you might think is necessary. So really cut away as much as possible of the roots that might be affected, and then repot it. So also don't pot it again in the soil that you had before. Definitely switch the soil. And what is also very important then is, of course, to look at the reasons behind the root rot occurring in the first place. And most of the time, this is simply problems when it comes to watering, and more specifically, of course, overwatering. So what does overwatering mean, or what do I mean by it? Because I don't mean it in a sense that you're giving it too much water at once. That is normally not a problem for a bonsai, because we have drainage holes, and the excess water anyway leaves through those drainage holes. What I mean with overwatering is you give it water too often. So definitely that is the problem then that leads to root rot. So instead of watering once every 2 to 3 days, let's say, for example, for a tree, where you give it a very, very heavy watering, which is not a problem, as I said, instead of doing that, you water it maybe once a day, twice a day, and you only give it a couple of sips of water every time, which leads to the soil staying wet the entire time. And that is the perfect ground then for root rot to affect your tree and really damage your tree then. So that is definitely what I mean with overwatering. It's not that you give it too much water, but you give it water too often. And never give it the chance to really dry out and get all the air also that it needs at the roots. So you're basically blocking out any air at the roots by keeping it too wet the entire time, which is the perfect environment for root rot to occur. As we're dealing with it, I already mentioned, so just to summarize, root rot is really something, once you have the notion it could be root rot, it definitely makes sense, if the season is right, of course, to take out the tree out of the pot, look at the roots and check for root rot, and if you see them, deal with it immediately, and hopefully that can save your tree. And as you can see with this one, after repotting, it took a while, but it's stabilized and it's starting to actually have new growth on it again. So definitely there is a chance to also come back from root rot and to save your tree from that. So that was a second common problem for your trees. So I would move on right away to the next topic, which is pests, because that is definitely also a problem that, as any plant, also can happen to your indoor bonsai. And what are the common pests? It's things like aphids, spider mites, maybe also scale. And when it comes to pests, of course, important how to spot them is by simply really taking the time to looking at your trees, looking at the leaves, looking at the stems, simply really visually checking if you can see any pests on them. Normally you can spot them quite easily, as they are insects, and of course you will see if something is crawling on your tree, and also you will probably first realize that something is going on if the health of your tree is also deteriorating. I have here my Portugalcaria afra bonsai that also at one point was battling a bit with spider mites. I think they are quite attracted to this succulent plants because they can really easily suck the sap from those leaves. And how do you, for example, spot spider mites? It's basically really just the webbing that you can see. So very thin, tiny webbing around the tree from branches to branches, for example, and that's the way you can spot that you probably have spider mites. How do you treat it normally? In my opinion, you can go for the commercial chemical treatments that you can find in normally any plant shop, or you can take more nature-friendly actions, I would say. So what I did, for example, with this succulent here, is I mixed some water with dishwashing soap, so common dishwashing soap, and sprayed the entire tree, sprayed also the soil, let it sit for around 10 to 15 minutes, and then give it a good watering with the normal clear water that you would use to water your tree, to make sure I wash the soap off again. But before, of course, giving it this time to really do its job and really killing the spider mites, washing it off afterwards so it doesn't affect the tree. And you do this maybe 3-4 times over a period of 1 to 2 weeks. And normally for most pests, this already will be enough. If there's something that is not being properly treated with this method, of course, you can always go back and use more chemical solutions for treating pests. But normally the important thing when it comes to pests as a problem is really to spot the problem, and the treatment of the problem normally isn't then a problem at all. That was mentioning problems a lot there. But definitely pests normally not too difficult to deal with, not too difficult to spot. So there's definitely, for example, as mentioned before, root rot I would see as a more serious problem, for example, than pests. Of course, if you don't take the time and you don't really check for pests, they can still, of course, do a lot of damage to your tree as well. So definitely always, as I said, keep an eye on your trees and see when the health is deteriorating, what could be the reasons behind that. One final problem that I also want to talk about is stunted growth, because that is also something that can happen on your trees. So what do I mean by stunted growth? It's simply growth that is not the way it should be. So it could be really deformed growth, it could be too tiny growth, it can be growth that simply in a way is not healthy looking. And the reasons for that can be, once again, manifold. One reason actually for that could be pest infestation. So pests that are sucking on the leaves of your tree, taking nutrients away from your tree, can have the effect that the tree is no longer able to produce really healthy, new healthy leaves. So when you have stunted growth, first thing that I would do is definitely check for pests, and then also take a step back and look at my fertilization routine. Of course, your tree needs a lot of nutrients to produce new growth, and if it doesn't have the nutrients that it needs for that, the growth will not be healthy and it will be stunted. So those are normally two of the main factors, and another factor could also be light. So if the light conditions are not correct for your tree, this could also affect new growth. Here again, it's quite easy to spot, of course. Just check the leaves of your tree, really look at them, see if there is any stunted growth. The one or the other leaf that might be stunted normally is not the problem, but if you can see that all the new growth is not healthy, then definitely it's something to look at. And then you really go, basically just take out your list and go off and tick off all the check marks, checking, is there pests on it? How is the lighting for the tree? Is it fitting to what this variety or this species needs? And have I been fertilizing it enough? Or have I over-fertilized it maybe also? And then normally that is also something, then once you adjust all those factors or the factors that might be the problem behind it, then your tree normally bounces back. And it's quite easy to see then when simply the new growth again is coming in healthy. So those are 4 very common problems for your indoor bonsai. Of course, they are also for bonsai in general, but I am focusing here on indoor bonsais because, for example, pests is especially something that affects, in many cases, indoor bonsais more often, because simply the environment indoors is often not as ideal as outside. So pests are simply more common on indoor bonsai, I would say. As I said, 4 problems. Hopefully I could give you an idea on how to treat them. And I told you my personal tip is really take the time, look at your trees. Also when they're healthy, simply keep always a check on them. If you do, for example, if you invest 5 minutes every time you water your tree to really take the time, sit it down, look at the leaves, look at the stem, look at the overall health of the tree. If there's something that simply seems a bit uncommon to you, out of place, that normally you don't see on that tree, definitely, then it is at an early stage, you can take actions and you will this way not have a big headache if you realize only 3 weeks later that there's a big problem and this already has spread on the tree way further than if you would have checked maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. So my big tip for you is simply always keep an eye out for problems on your trees. Keep an open eye, just invest the time to really look at the health, and then you will be able to deal with those problems at an earlier stage, which makes it way easier normally to treat those problems. So hopefully the problems I mentioned and the solutions were interesting to you, and hopefully they will help you to also better deal with your trees in the future. If you have still any questions about other problems or about these problems in more detail, feel free to leave those in the comments and I will answer them as soon as I see them. If you enjoyed this video, of course, feel free to leave a like, and if you enjoy this channel, of course, feel free to subscribe to it. And hopefully then I will see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.